This is Drive
with Roberto Perrone
on the BBC in Beds, Hearts and Bucks.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
19 minutes past 6, talking money and business with Danielle Bruce, Peter Warburton, Jonathan Davis. Gentlemen, you two are about to kick off just before the travel news. Interest rates at an all-time low, 2 years. I think they've been kept at this low level. Someone like Danielle and I, Jonathan and Peter, what should we do? Should we go out and borrow loads of money and try to take advantage of the financial situation?
Well, even if you did, there's no guaranteeing you get anything anywhere near the very low 0.5% bank rate, which is the official interest rate. We all know that you and I go out to borrow, then the rates are different. Maybe 4 or 5% for a mortgage, or indeed maybe 10% for a loan, or and something in double.
But 4 or 5% for a mortgage is still, historically very low.
It is, but obviously, starting a new mortgage, you probably need to get 25% of the purchase price as a deposit, and that's a big stumbling block for a lot of people.
In 390 years' history of the Bank of England, the average interest rate has been 5%. We are at 0.5%. We've never been at this position in history. Thus, it's totally extreme. Thus, in due course, people need to realise that it will normalise. Interest rates are very likely over the next several years to go to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7%. Peter said earlier, while we've got these very, very low interest rates around the world. Well, that's very interesting, because in Ireland they're paying 10%, in Portugal they're paying 8%, a year ago they're paying 3.5%, in Greece they're paying 12%. So actually, interest rates are going to rise.
So what will our interest rates be, do you predict, gentlemen? Danielle, your business is self-funding. We remember speaking to you last time, a couple of weeks ago. You've done it all yourself with your partner. You've managed to be. It's your own business. It's yours.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% mine. That said, it doesn't mean that it's very, very easy to go ahead and do all of these things. And I'm expanding at the moment. That costs money. Where do I find the money? Do I go and borrow it from the bank? No, I don't. I have to try and find it, which means I have to go out, get more business, put that back into business, and then expand that way. But it is hard. It does make you question whether or not you should go out and expand via the bank.
But as you try and expand your business and self-finance it, do you find that the doors will open? Do you find that the red tape has been removed? You can move your particular line of work forward?
Yeah, personally, and I think this has probably held me in good stead, I'm personally scared of debt as a person, regardless of the fact that I run a business. I have never been in any debt, touch wood, and that's because I have stopped having the things I wanted to have. That's my upbringing. I've got to give my hand up to my mum.
But Jonathan is nodding his head. That's one of the big reasons why we're in this big mess, because people, if they wanted a flat-screen television or a holiday in the Caribbean, you know what, even if they couldn't afford it, they'll just stick on a bit of plastic, they'll have it anyway.
We've had a decade of an orgy of debt and spend up until a couple of years ago. People need to get real. We are now in the biggest hangover in history. The banks are not lending as they were, not even close, because they know how bad things are, and the red ink that they're going to have in their balance sheets going forward from massive property, residential and commercial property losses going forward, and business losses, business failures. That's the reason why they're not lending, and they're not going to be lending for years.
Peter?
Well, I think that's oversimplifying things. The thing is that you think of there are people who wanted to buy a property for the last 5 years. They can afford the deposit. They will obviously be buying at more reasonable prices, and they still can't get finance now. So the thing is that, the sins of the past. There's no disputing. We got ourselves in a great hole. But the thing is, there are people who are without debt completely, but who want to buy a property, and they're suffering at the expense of this situation. I'm saying that there's scope to allow new borrowers to come in. Other people need to be paying debt back, but some people ought to be getting better access to credit.
Can I just ask all of the panel, how do we define personal debt? To the man and woman in the street, driving home tonight in the Three Counties, they've been at work, if they're lucky enough to still have a job, they're driving home. Because I define debt as, I don't include mortgages as debt, because I think as a long-term investment. I'm talking about, for me, debt is credit cards, loans, and is that debt to you? Or
for me, because of the fact I don't like debt, debt is something that you have because you wanted something else. And it's probably not that.
But do you include your mortgage in that? Or?
No, absolutely not.
That's separate.
No, that's separate because it's driving, and hopefully, in a couple of years, it will be ours. Not really a couple of years, but it will be ours eventually, and we're striving for that. But debt for cars and debt for holidays and debt for the latest shoes and the latest.
What if a successful businesswoman? What if you walk past you drive past a lovely garage and there is that gleaming, nice car, which the badge is right, the colours right, and it's just screaming, Danielle, I want to be yours.
It can stay there until I can afford it.
You've just basically had a discussion which encapsulates beautifully the myth that mortgage debt is not debt. Debt is debt is debt. If it walks like a duck and squawks like a duck, it is a duck. And the only reason why people have come to view mortgage debt as good is because it is a fact, for 30 years, house prices rose. Well, now I would say to you that we are in absolutely the reverse of that. Started in late 2007 with Northern Rock collapse and then the biggest banking collapse in history. We are now in the hangover of the biggest debt bubble in history. And as it happens, house prices are down 15% across the country since 2007. Hold on, no, I've got to finish.
You say that, Jonathan, but actually, if you want a house in the right area, whatever that, however you determine that, those prices, they may have come down a little bit, but they are still quite steady.
House prices are down 15% across the country. They're down as much as 45% in Northern Ireland, and even in London and the southeast, which is clearly where we are right now, asking prices are no lower than 2007, but I'll tell you, transaction prices are 25% lower, and you simply only have to look at the volumes of housing transactions. They are 60% down on 2006 and 7. In other words, people who are asking the same prices as 3 years ago, they're not selling their properties. Thus, prices are going to fall, in my view, 20% over the next 2 years.
See, I don't see that.
No, I wouldn't class it as a good debt. I don't think there is any such thing as a good debt. But what I would say...
But it's an investment.
And if the investment is something for you...
Only if the prices rise. But if in my view, as I forecast, house prices against inflation, in other words, in real terms, are going to fall 50% over the next 5 to 10 years, I'd say they're already down 15%, then I tell you what, if you take it at £400,000 debt on a £450,000 house or a £500,000 house, you're going to find yourself in negative equity.
As the senior economist here, Pete, how do you view all this? Should we be concerned?
Well, I think what we're coming to is the issue of inflation, and obviously one way that things could go is what Jonathan has just said, but in another way, and I think actually a much more likely direction that we're going to go is we're going to have higher inflation. So basically, people are going to be given the opportunity to earn higher wages in order to afford their debts, and that's been a historic resolution of debt. It's a way of, if you like, kind of lifting the tide so that all the boats get lifted, and most people then become able to service their debts. Fewer people fall into arrears. Fewer people lose their properties. But what it does mean that those on fixed incomes get their wealth taken away.
That's such a sanguine view. What about the 400,000 who are losing their job in the public sector in the next 4 years? And they, of course, keep the private sector going very much. At one point, 50% of our economy was coming from the public sector. Incomes will only rise if you're in a job. And take the current situation, the last year or two, wages have not risen at all, and yet we've got 5% inflation. So we're actually seeing real cuts in incomes. So that's an incredibly sanguine view, and I do not think it's based on fundamentals.
There were 38,000 homeowners who fell into mortgage arrears at the end of the last quarter of 2010, before we had this current quarter, of course. Should banks and building societies be more lenient to homeowners?
They've got to run a business, and they've got to decide what's right for their business. Obviously they've got a lot of other stakeholders apart from the borrowers. Obviously they're not a charity, and clearly they have to decide when to draw the line on a loan that isn't being properly looked after. But it has to be said, this is nothing like what we had in the 1980s.
It's a great deal worse.
Well, I'm saying that the actual experience of repossession and arrears is nothing. I mean, it's miles less than it was before, and so in other words, we haven't got the dislocation. At the same time, we have plenty of job creation in the private sector, more than enough, in my view, to overwhelm
I want to come back to job creation. I'd love to know whether these jobs, where they are and where they're really coming from.